The immigrant experience is the American experience.
And welcome everybody to the Sundance Film Festival. We're really excited to have you guys here. We're really excited to be partnering with CAAM in this way. It's really important for us in the outreach and inclusion team to be able to have these kinds of discussions and really be able to sort of engage with the community around, what is the inclusion work that we're trying to do at Sundance? How are we partnering with great organizations like CAAM? And how are we working with the field to get this work done? Because I think one of the things that we're all seeing is that, there's a lot of work being done across a variety of communities around bringing that discourse more into the center of the media industry and into the media landscape. And it's more and more important for us to bring these conversations together and start having these conversations in an intersectional way. So I'm really glad to be moderating this conversation. So rather than have me read each of your bios to this wonderful group of folks here, why don't we just go around and have everybody introduce themselves, especially for those of you guys that have films or projects here, to talk a little bit about what you're here at the film festival with. Why don't we start with you, Bing?
My name is Bing Liu, and I'm a Chicago-based filmmaker. Got my start as a grip electrician, and then became a camera assistant. And then I moved into documentary. So I'm here with two projects. One is called Minding the Gap. It's in the feature documentary category. And then another is called, I'm a segment director on America to Me, which is Steve James's indie episodic.
My name is Sue Obeidi. I'm the director of the Hollywood Bureau at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I want to thank CAAM and the Sundance Institute for inviting us to be part of this panel. Muslim voices are new to the landscape, and we're so eager to talk and to educate and to, establish a rapport and understanding with you. I am not a filmmaker. I work for an organization that consults and connects Muslim talent to the industry, and I know we'll be talking about that later. I've been with the organization for over 17 years. Most of those years I was the director of operations, running the business, and the last 5 years I juggled two roles as a nonprofit organization. That's what you do. And then after the elections, because of the demands from the industry, the organization transitioned me to a full-time Hollywood director.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew An. I'm a queer Korean-American filmmaker based in Los Angeles. I was the writer-director of a film called Spa Night, which was at Sundance here in 2016. Won the Cassavetes Award at the Spirit Awards last year. And then I'm here at the festival this year with a TV show called This Close, which is in the indie episodic category.
I want to kind of start this conversation off with something maybe a little bit controversial, because I think, it's worth taking this idea of the immigrant voice with a grain of salt. I mean, I think, one of the things, I think Don really framed the conversation really well, in that, we are in a moment where, the word immigrant carries a connotation to it, and in certain contexts, it's a dirty word. And, the idea of the immigrant being sort of cast as an other is a strange thing, particularly given the roots of this country and immigration. And so, even within the Asian American experience, the idea of sort of a singular immigrant voice is not accurate. And so I think, this idea that there is an Asian American immigrant voice or an immigrant voice to begin with sort of takes for granted the diversity of experiences that immigrants can have and the diversity of experiences that artists are bringing as they are telling their stories. And so I think when we're talking about an immigrant voice, what we're talking about is a culturally specific storytelling, or a culturally specific story. And so, one of the things I want to hear from each of you guys, particularly the filmmakers here, is, to what degree do you feel, as someone from a specific community or a variety of communities, depending on how you identify yourself, what is the responsibility of a filmmaker to tell a culturally specific story that's unique to their own experience, and to what degree are filmmakers from certain communities more interested in telling universal stories? And obviously that's a different answer for different people, but Bing, to start with you, it might be useful just to kind of talk a little bit about what the story is behind your film here, Minding the Gap. And it's obviously a very personal story for you, so I'd love to hear about how that story developed and to what degree you were trying to tell something that was specific to your own experience and your culture, or something that felt more universal that would connect with broader audiences.
The film Minding the Gap is it follows two of my friends that I grew up skateboarding with, and deals with many issues: race, class, family violence. Growing up in a working class community. But it's multi-ethnic. So we have a white subject, an African American subject, and I sort of enter the film in a non-traditional way. So I feel like, every day was sort of a negotiation for how we told each other's stories. And I feel like I had more agency in telling the white subject story because I feel like I, should be able to comment on that because that's the dominant power structure in our society. I had to be more careful with the African American story, that has its own voice, it has its own history and its own community. But I could recognize, the lines of connection that we did have, in terms of, the struggles that our families had and what that had to do with power structures in society.
Can you tell for the folks that haven't seen the film what the story of the film is?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't want to give too much away. So I grew up with two skateboarders in this city outside of Chicago called Rockford, Illinois. And, we escaped violent households when we were younger. And when I go back, we track these two young men's lives over the course of 3 or 4 years in present circumstances. And we see how our experiences as children plays out in the present. So, and in order to tell the story of me as the filmmaker, I had to sort of dig back into my own personal history. And I am an immigrant. My mother and I did immigrate to this country when I was 5. But I mean, I don't know. I guess our story was I guess the best way of telling our immigrant story is just being honest with all the small details of our journey to this country. So.
Mm-hmm. Did you go into the film wanting your own personal story to be a part of it?
No, it sort of slowly morphed over time into a place where I was like, okay, I need to enter into the story to be able to to be able to tackle some of the issues as honestly as we wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, your last film, Spa Night, and the project that you're here at the festival with in our first ever indie episodic section, This Close, are very different in a lot of ways. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, with both of those projects, what was the development process like? Because for Spa Night, it's something that obviously is, in some ways more directly connected to your own experience, maybe less so for This Close, but I'm curious to hear you kind of compare and contrast the story creation processes for both of those projects, and to what you personally sort of brought from your own experience to them.
So Spa Night is about a young Korean American man living in Los Angeles who is struggling with his identity. He works at a Korean spa and finds out that it's a popular spot for gay men to cruise, and he explores his sexuality that way. And for me as a gay Korean American, that intersection is something that I really wanted to explore. I had never really seen in film before, and I went out to make that film kind of not caring what people thought about it. I wasn't really necessarily thinking about, okay, I'm making a universal story. I wanted to tell something really specific, something that felt true to my experience. And then This Close, it's a TV show about two best friends living in Los Angeles who happen to be deaf. And it's a story about how your best friend can be the person that makes you the happiest, but then it can also deeply hurt you and betray you. And the show has a lot to do with communication and how even though you're speaking the same language, you may misunderstand each other. And that was a script that is written by Josh Feldman and Shoshana Stern, who are both deaf. And I went in to interview and talk to them about potentially directing this series. And I think that they hired me because this was kind of their spa night, it was like a personal story, and they knew that I wasn't gonna take it over and then try and try and lessen their voice, because I could tell that this was really something that they were so passionate about in a way that I was passionate about making Spa Night. And so I wanted to be as respectful of their community and their authorship as much as possible. I think when we talk about questions of universality, versus, really getting into the nitty-gritty specifics. I mean, people say this a lot, where they say like, oh, like you get to the universal through the specifics, and I agree with that. It's a weird thing though, because like I'll be in interviews or in panels, I did so many for Spa Night, where someone would be like, oh, it's so Korean and it's so gay, and I'd be like, no, it's universal. And then another interviewer would be like, oh, it's so universal. I'd be like, it's gay and Korean, and it's like, it's both, right? Like you want it to be both, and ultimately for me, it's like, I think at least my job as a filmmaker is to tell as human a story as possible, and like we should be able to connect to those stories, unless we're psychopaths, So for me, it's like, how can I make sure that I don't exploit or take advantage or disrespect the characters on screen?
I'm curious to dig into a little bit more the process of actually the creation of This Close. I mean, as you were approaching directing a project that was created and scripted by two creators about a very specific experience that they deal with in terms of being deaf, being something that you don't have experience with, how did that sensitivity and sort of the way that you were approaching the subject matter, given that this was their stories, how did that manifest in terms of the direction as you were working with them as actors, but who were also writers and creators, but you as the director sort of having, sort of an outside perspective in terms of the way that the series was going to be created? What was that relationship like, and how did that really manifest on set? Because I'm curious, to dig into some of the specifics of that, for filmmakers in the crowd here that, are trying to tell stories that, may be about their experience, or maybe it's not, maybe it has nothing to do with them, but, this idea of, and I think you touched on this, which I think, really resonates with a lot of people, that idea of, everybody is other in some way. This idea of sort of a culture of immigrants that all come from a very specific experience, but are also universally other in very different ways, depending on how you identify and what cultures you identify with. And so, in the way of sort of approaching telling a universal story through a cultural experience that was not your own, I'm curious just what that creative push and pull, or maybe there wasn't any push and pull, maybe it was very, synergistic, but I'd love to kind of understand in a specific way kind of what that was like.
When I met with Josh and Shoshana for the first time, I was just really struck by their friendship, which is really at the, their real life best friends, and we show that on screen in the show. Besides the kind of superficial differences of having to signal like action and cut in a different way, my job as a director was the same as if I were working with hearing actors. You're really focused on character, on motivation. I never wanted the reason for an action in the show to be, because your character's deaf, in the show, like Michael, he's an alcoholic because his family has a problem with alcoholism because he's heartbroken. Kate, she doesn't ask for her promotion at work because she's intimidated by her boss and because she hasn't found a client that she's passionate about yet. We were always trying to find the deeper reasoning behind what was going on in the show. Of course, being deaf is a part of their experience, but again, it's intersectional. Like, it was never going to be the only thing, and if it was the only thing, then I knew that I was doing my job badly, and so it was really just about diving into the story, diving into these characters, collaborating a lot with Josh and Shoshana, who had very strong connections to their characters, and together, finding something that felt very layered, and there are certain things where I just fully deferred to them, like at one point I had this thought that, like, Michael, he moves into a new place at the beginning of the series, and he's trying to put together a futon, and he flicks it off, and then he starts. I was wondering, it's like, oh, maybe he should like talk to it, and then Josh was like, deaf people don't talk to inanimate objects, like they don't move, like we don't do that, and so I was like, great, like we're not going to do that then, like so it's just being really respectful in the process and knowing that like you're going to mess up, right, and you're going to make assumptions that aren't appropriate, and it's really just about being respectful of the process, being respectful of whose story is being told, and kind of getting out of the way. Like for me, it's a little bit weird to talk about the show without them, because in interviews I'd just be like, Josh, Shoshana, what do you think? So yeah.
I love that story because I was really curious to know if there were moments during the direction of that series where, as a director, you're directing them in a certain direction based on, assumptions that you might have about a certain community, not being a part of that community, and then if there were tension points between them, sort of coming back and being like, well, that would just never happen. And I think that, it's great that that kind of dialogue was so open and possible during the production of that project, because I think, so often whether people are told externally or whether people feel internally that they're not allowed to explore another cultural experience outside of their own, it's because people are either afraid of constructing a story that's not authentic because they're not collaborating in the right way with the other artists involved in the project, or from the outside, people are told that they're not given permission to tell the story of someone, or an experience that's outside of their own culture. And so, I'm always really curious about those kinds of experiences because it's often seen as something that's taboo, but, depending on the nature of the collaboration and the way that you described, it sounds like, those kinds of tension points when approached in the right way are natural and there's nothing wrong with that. And arguably that's where we get to a point where we kind of understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah, I'll say very quickly, like I think it was really significant that Josh and Shoshana brought me in. I think it was important that like that was the dynamic from the beginning, because I think it just established for me, how I can collaborate and work, with them, as opposed to feeling like I was forcing something.
This is actually a really natural transition to Sue and the work that you're doing at MPAC, because I think, one of the things that you and I have spoken a lot about most recently is when, MPAC works with industry partners to tell a story that is more culturally authentic, particularly if there are people in the key creative roles that are not a part of that culture. And, that's obviously something that, on a big scale, audiences from a specific culture, when they see that there are movies being made about their community by people that are not from that community, that's a really sensitive subject. And there are certainly, very wrong ways to do that. And I think we all have examples in our minds that we can bring forward about that. And I think, this is a really interesting transition just to kind of talk in more detail about the work that you do at MPAC and the Hollywood Bureau. And I'd love, in specifics, to kind of drill into the collaboration that you guys did with Disney around Aladdin.
Although I have, we are under an NDA, so as much as I can, right?
Fair enough.
But can I just backtrack a little bit about the immigrant experience and what have you? I know this is being recorded, and I thought long and hard, and I just need to get it off my chest if it's okay.
Do it.
The immigrant experience is the American experience. Unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant. That's just the fact. Unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant. And we are the ones that made America what it is. It is awesome, not because of us, not despite of us. And I really want the president to know that America without us is would be an SHIT whole country. And I really believe that. And we are not here on a lease. We might not be born here, but this is our country. And we're gonna stay and make it amazing. And I just needed to say that, and thank you. And I do represent the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and I do believe they'd stand right behind me with that, even though we are nonpartisan. I just needed to say that. Okay, so Impact's Hollywood Bureau. First of all, Impact. Impact is an organization that was founded 30 years ago. Our mission is to improve public policy and understanding about Islam and Muslims by engaging our government, local, federal, state, federal, our media, news and entertainment media, and interfaith and intra-faith communities. Our model is that of engagement. We want to engage with people who don't agree with us, who may not like us, and we don't want to be preaching to the choir because we're not going to be moving any needles or moving any mountains if we're just preaching to the choir. So we are an organization that actually goes into spaces where we want to learn and from one another and educate ourselves to the other community and other communities, LGBTQ, African Americans, the Jewish community, Hispanic community. So again, our model is that of engagement. We'd rather be in the door instead of outside the door. With regards to our Hollywood work, we do two things, and they're just two umbrella things. We consult on TV and film projects. We are not a watchdog organization, meaning we don't go in and tell the creatives maybe what they did wrong, but just how to improve their storylines and minimize their the stereotypes that may exist. We give notes and just pray to God that they take them. If they don't, then the story goes without the notes, and if they do, then it's even better. One thing about Impact is that we don't knock on anyone's door to consult. We've only received our consulting projects by word of mouth. Our clients include Disney, Paramount, Hulu, Legendary TV, the networks, Nat Geo, FX, and a few others. So that makes it like a better relationship because they are coming to us and saying, can you partner up? Can you collaborate? So when we are invited to brainstorm storylines, we absolutely take the opportunity to do so. And it's actually fun to do that, and we've done that with other clients. The other thing we do is connect. We connect our emerging talent with creatives and decision makers. We try to get them into writers' rooms. We try to get them into the studio system, the production companies. We have a two-path model. We want to impact the narrative from the creative side by telling our own stories, and then the other path is the business model, getting them into agencies, into production companies, into networks. And, we organize workshops, we do networking events, we have our Hollywood Summit where we take 15 or so college and graduate students all around Hollywood to meet with creatives and decision makers in the industry, both creative and the business side. And I don't know if Akafa Khan is here, but she's like a success story. She's now working for the Sundance Institute, and she came through the ranks of Impact. So that is what Impact does, and that is what the Hollywood Bureau does, consults and connects. But you wanted to ask specifically about a specific project, and I'm going to need to ask you to ask me something specific.
I think it'd be useful to explain a little bit more about what is the nature of that consulting and how receptive do you generally feel when you're working. I'm sure it varies, but I'm curious what the nature of that collaboration looks like and to what degree you feel there's any kind of resistance.
Because we are not asking to consult, the relationship's very smooth. With regards to our notes that we submit, we had to at times hop on a conference call to discuss a particular note. We talk it through. Not specific to Aladdin or any other, client. Sometimes they'll tell us why they're not going to take the note. and sometimes they'll tell us, explain further. So it's a collaboration, a partnership. We don't get into their creative space because they are the. You
guys aren't like in the writers' rooms, like working with the creators.
Not with our consulting clients. That is correct. And with regards to Aladdin, they're working very hard to improve the 1992 Aladdin. I am very proud of the project. I think that they have a great team, and we're in constant communication with them.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking as a Pakistani American, Muslim American
Yeah.
individual, I mean, a lot of us have such complicated feelings about that film. It's like you see it when you're a kid and you're like, oh man, this is amazing. There's people that look like me in a Disney movie. Isn't this awesome? And then you get older and you're like, you look at it again, you're like, ooh.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Back to the Future,
that wasn't cool.
Yeah, without dating myself. I mean, Back to the Future, I was like, wow, they included Arabs. It's like, wow. Wow, oh yeah, they included us. Thanks. So
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
People have very conflicted relationships to that film. So it's.
Yeah, no, and any other film. It's not the only
Sure,
one. But
sure.
I mean, just working with them, I see how hard they're working to, make it different this time around. So, and that's, I'm not saying that because we're consultants. I'm just saying that because it is true. And that's it. And a lot, we're consulting on the Looming Tower for Hulu, and same thing, we do what we can and hope for the best. All the more reason we need to move as an organization, Impacts Hollywood Bureau, others in the community who consult. All the more reason we need to get in the creative space. We need to get in the business space. If we have a lot of consulting projects in 5 years, we're not doing a great job as marginalized communities, because we need to minimize those. We need to minimize the need for consulting, because we're creating our own narratives and we're greenlighting our own projects and we're telling America what they want to watch. That would be the ultimate success, in the industry for impact.
Circling back to Bing and Andrew, I'm curious just, as you guys are working through your creative processes and, thinking through projects and stories that you want to tell, and I'm curious to dig into like what that process looks like for you, and if, particularly given our current political climate, if you feel as a creator there's a responsibility to tell a story that is very specific to your culture or another culture, or if you feel like, as you're trying to tell stories, there is a pressure as someone that is from a disenfranchised community to tell a story that is in some way political, or if that's something in our current climate you feel is less relevant and you're telling the stories that you're trying to tell because of what kind of pulls you in, or maybe it's a combination of both. But I'm curious to understand from the filmmaking perspective if you feel in our current climate there is that pressure to tell a certain kind of story given what's going on in the world around us right now. Bing, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so Mind in the Gap takes place in a sort of Rust Belt city. And I was really excited by that, the fact that Mind in the Gap is coming out now, because last year there was a lot of talk about the white working class and middle America and flyover states. And I think as an Asian American immigrant in the Midwest, there's a lot of room for those stories to be told. I think growing up, I didn't realize there was such a big Asian American bastions in the coasts, in terms of culture and history and all these famous people that I got to know when I was in college, when I took Asian American studies classes. And so I'm really excited by that fact, to continue to pursue Asian American stories in the Midwest. So,
is that a particular area that you feel really drawn to in terms of where you draw inspiration from and the kind of stories that you're trying to tell? Do you feel they're sort of, at least currently, kind of specific to that region and that community?
Yeah, I think it's a hotbed for spaces of interaction between people of different political backgrounds. I think, I'll go to like LA or New York and I'm like, oh my God, I'll go to California. I'm like, oh my God, it's so liberal here. Like everyone's just like driving a Prius and everyone's just like talking politics and everyone's like, talking leftist. In the Midwest, it's not that much, I'll run into Trump supporters and it's like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm having a conversation with this person. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I grew up in Chicago as well, and there is this perception that the middle of the country, particularly in this current moment, that the middle of the country is very homogenous and white, and that's where all the Trump voters came from. And it's on some level that may be true, but that voter base is certainly not as homogenous as we're all led to believe. And I think those of us that are from communities of color and are discovering sort of the sort of multifaceted politics that exist within those communities, it's a lot more complex than I think we're thinking. I mean, so that idea that you really want to dig into the experience of this specific region and the Asian American experience within that, do you feel like that's for personal reasons, or do you feel like political motivations to tell that story? Like, do you feel like you're trying to say something about that community, or is it more just those are the stories that kind of pull you in because those are the ones that you relate to?
I think both. I think it's important for these people in the Midwest to feel empowered, especially people of color, people in immigrant communities. I think so. One of the storylines in Mind in the Gap sort of pays off in a way where one of the characters has a racial awakening, we'll say, and that's that doesn't always happen in the Midwest. It's I think it's happening a lot more with the internet and with our more connected world. You have people in the Midwest who might be in isolated pockets where it's like, I don't feel like I have a Vietnamese American community to latch on to. But, with the internet, I can see like, oh no, there are people who look like me, who, like have similar experiences to me. And now I feel empowered to sort of claim my identity. I think there's just a lot of really interesting, complex stories like that happening in the Midwest.
Mm. Andrew, what about you? Are you a political filmmaker?
Yes. I mean, I think for me, the personal is the political, and I think it's irresponsible to try and separate those. I think in terms of this question of like, do I feel a responsibility or just like a need to tell stories about an Asian American protagonist, like it's interesting. After I made Spa Night, I had a number of filmmaker friends who are Asian American, but made films that didn't necessarily star like an Asian American, lead or protagonist, like come to me and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "I want to make an Asian movie." And I was like, "Great, go do it." But they wanted a conversation, which I thought was interesting. And I've spoken with screenwriters who are Asian American and aren't necessarily writing Asian American driven stories, and executives or friends, other screenwriters are telling them, "Hey, where's your personal story? Like, why aren't you doing that?" And so it's interesting because it's like they should. I mean, as artists, we should be able to make the work that we want to make, but yes, like in this current society, in this political climate, because we have access to this community, because we know this community well, because we can tell these stories in a more nuanced, more grounded way, should we do that? It's a very complicated question, and I struggle with it all the time, and I really. I think that as artists, we have to feel like there's the autonomy that we can learn and make mistakes in our work, but then at the same time, work within a system that might punish us or ignore us.
Can I add something to it? So this is what we struggle with this a lot at the Bureau, because we have, Muslim screenwriters who want to tell their passion story, for example, about the Prophet Muhammad or Imam Hussein, and I get calls and emails, and my first reaction is, oh my God, who's going to pay to see that? And probably no one, in mainstream America, and I feel horrible. We feel horrible because we're trying to promote their skills and their crafts and get them in the door. But we have to come to terms, and I think Impact is where we want our creatives to tell the story, to tell a story they want to tell, but also tell a story that America wants to see right now, because right now we have to appeal to the mainstream, to the masses, to change the narrative, to get the needle, moved a little bit. And our advice is usually perfect your craft, tell a great story that it becomes a success in some way, like Lena Khan's The Tiger Hunter, which appeals to mainstream audiences. And then you can tell your passion story, but we're not sure that's the right answer either. Do you tell your passion story where you're preaching to the choir, or do you tell your passion story and you tweak it to appeal to the masses, so then you can tell your real passion story? So I totally understand that, but there's no answer. There's no real answer for that.
I think this idea of the mainstream is really complicated because, if we only react to the mainstream, I feel like we're never going to make work that's going to push what can be a part of that, right? And so there's this, and it's like I made Spa Night thinking no one was going to see it, but I was still going to make it because it felt important to me and to my community, and we didn't necessarily have mainstream success, but I'm hoping that it lives within our history, and that people come back to it, that it means something, or that it inspires other filmmakers to be like, hey, I can tell my story, and it's valuable, and people people will find meaningfulness in it. As I kind of find myself in my career now, this question of the mainstream, it's really tricky and it's really difficult, but it is the way to get to a bigger audience, and so it's a game to play almost,
Navigating, you're navigating. It's a tightrope, really, and the industry, I think, is helping us a little bit. With regards to Muslims, finally, after the elections, and we've seen better representation and inclusion. I'm not implying that we are where we need to be. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is now we have, an LGBTQ hijabi, a woman who covers on, freeforms, the bold type, where, a few years ago you never saw that. We have a Muslim superhero on CW's DC Legends of Tomorrow. The Big Sick, Master of None. These are all Muslim narratives, whether or not the writer or the director identifies with their faith. That's on the side. The theme is out there. It's feeling a little bit different, and we are hopefully trying to, hopefully the industry is balancing out that whole, Muslims are 7-Eleven owners, gas station owners, taxi drivers, or terrorists. So so we need to encourage the mainstream community to include more of those representations, the former representations.
Andrew, you mentioned this idea of going mainstream as a way to change the narrative. I'm curious, what that means. When you talk about sort of looking at a mainstream genre, or I'm making an assumption there and just saying, that in that you mean genre by mainstream, but, when you think about changing the narrative through a mainstream film, what does that look like to you? And is that something that's a part of your process right now? Are you kind of working in that space, trying to do something that is kind of more mainstream that helps change that narrative, or what does that look like?
I don't know. It's such a hard question. For me, I think a lot about my sustainability as an artist and being able to get a seat at the table so that I can bring more people to the table. But at the same time, I kind of hate the mainstream. I think if we are slaves to the mainstream, then we're never going to make work that pushes it, right? And so, I really want to support artists who are making work that's really just coming from them, and they're not worried about how much money it's going to make, or if it's going to get them all this attention. That's the work that really excites me. But I also know that, I was once talking to a filmmaker, and she was telling me, it's I only want to make films about women and I should be okay with that. And then she looked at me and she's like, you could make films about gay Koreans and you should be okay with that. And I was like, I don't know if I'll be able to pay rent, you know? Like, it's tough. And I, in some ways, like, I'd love to be able to do that, and maybe in making work that's not about gay Koreans right now in my career, I can help a queer, you know, Asian American filmmaker be able to have that kind of career where they could just make that kind of work and sustain themselves. You know, so, you know, in this kind of moment in time that we're in, you know, I think it's about trying to balance these things, you know, and for me it was so exciting with This Close, where, you know, it was such a unique story, and it's the first TV show that's written, created, and starring, you know, deaf talent. Like, that to me was like, I can get behind this, you know, and the fact that it's on a platform like Sundance Now that can kind of push and get it out there, you know, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, it's picking and choosing projects, which is, it's tricky because, you know, as a young director, I'm not necessarily getting a lot of opportunity, you know, and so I think that's why authorship is so important. And, you know, I always think that I'm going to go back to, you know, the communities that I'm a part of and want to tell these stories, you know, even if that means it's like I'm going to have to, like, mortgage the house that I'm getting, you know, from a directing job that's bigger, you know. So yeah, you know, I think we have a responsibility kind of both ways, you know, and for me, it's like, how can I support other artists who are doing maybe the other, you know, strategy that I'm not doing, and that's good, you know. It's, if we just get more, that'll show the diversity, the richness of you know, this filmmaking, you know, community that we have.
I'm curious, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, you know, how this idea of sort of changing a narrative in a mainstream way, I mean, how does that, to what degree does that inform your work, and how does that manifest as a documentary filmmaker where, you know, the market is different and the way that you're distributing your work is different? Not necessarily super different in that, you know, documentaries have obviously, you know, had robust viewership for a long time now, and it's consistently growing with the more outlets that are buying those films. But I'm curious, as, you know, a documentary filmmaker, what does sort of changing the narrative look like for you, and how are you trying to do that through your work and your creative practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a different field. There's, you know, diehard, like, documentary lover crowd, and the ones that break out are often, you know, dead rock star documentaries or, you know, food document. You know, it's true. It's but so it's you know, to make documentaries that are more nuanced about the things that I want to make. I think it's about messing with perceptions and tricking people into thinking that, you know, they're going to go in seeing a film about one thing, but then it slowly becomes something else. And those are the stories that I'm really interested in. Yeah. And I think that's the key to breaking into mainstream now is, you know, you can have your it's tricking the audience. You know, it's all about tricking, it's all about deception. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, that's a really interesting point, though. There is something to that, in that obviously the means by which documentary stories are being told has evolved rapidly over the last several years. And I think, you know, particularly with the rise of the docuseries, there are a lot of opportunities to, you know, to use the documentary form in new and exciting ways that, you know, are finding audiences more and more. And so I'm curious about the way that kind of informs content creation from a nonfiction storyteller's standpoint. So that's interesting. Thank you, Cam, so much for putting this on. This is great. And thank you all for coming. Happy Sundance. Have a great festival.
Thank you.